building an image of thinking as a tool capable of switching trajectories, changing the configuration of reality, working with time as matter, the ether of the mind for those seeking intellectual drive, a sense of mental power. Reality has a structure that can be disassembled, understood, and reconfigured through the dimension of time as the building material of this architecture. The past ceases to be a closed archive of facts and becomes a space of possibilities for rethinking the present. I begin by clearing the cognitive environment of inherited interpretations that function as invisible filters. These filters were formed through education, cultural dissemination, linguistic structures. They create the illusion that reality has a single form. My Mentis code philosophy recognizes these layers as historical constructs rather than natural data. When I see the genealogy of my own categories of thinking, I gain the ability to reconfigure them.
This occurs through systematic deconstruction of automatic connections between concepts. Success means productivity, productivity means efficiency, efficiency means maximizing results in minimal time. This chain seems logical, but it is historically specific, shaped by the industrial era and capitalist rationality. Breaking it means creating space for alternative connections. Success can mean depth of experience, quality of presence, resonance with the inner logic of the process. I stop performing someone else's scenarios disguised as my own goals. The epistemological position determines the ontological reality. If you perceive the past as a fixed sequence of events, you live in a determined reality where the present is the result of an unchanging chain of causes. If you see the past as a multiplicity of interpretations continuously reconstructed, you live in a reality where meaning is created actively rather than passively inherited.
This difference is not abstract. It defines whether you perform a script written before you or create new trajectories. Such an approach shifts the focus to choice and responsibility for your own epistemological position. You bypass simple passive inheritance and choose to create actively. This emphasizes the active, continuous work of consciousness. Freedom begins with the freedom of interpretation. If you can change your perception of the past, you can change your reality. Genealogical thinking reveals the conditionality of any structure. Economic systems, political orders, moral norms, aesthetic criteria, all crystallized at a certain moment through conflicts, compromises, contingencies. Seeing this crystallization process means seeing points where the structure could have formed differently. These bifurcation points exist in the present as well. Most people do not see them because they perceive existing structures as natural. Historical consciousness denaturalizes the present and makes alternative trajectories visible. Working with the multifunctionality of time, you create new configurations of meanings. An ancient philosophical problem resonates with a modern scientific discovery. A forgotten social practice illuminates the limitations of current institutions. An old form of community organization reveals possibilities that seem impossible in the modern context. This resonance is not a simple borrowing. It is the creation of new hybrids through combining elements from different temporal layers. Causal thinking on multiple levels allows strategic action. Events are noticeable and dramatic, but they are symptoms of deeper structures. Changing an event without changing the structure means getting another event with the same logic. Changing the structure means transforming the very possibilities of certain events.
But structures change slowly, through accumulation of small shifts at the level of everyday practices. Strategic action combines interventions on all three levels simultaneously. Abductive thinking goes beyond available data. When you formulate a hypothesis that explains disparate facts, you create a new pattern. This pattern becomes a tool for organizing experience. Science works the same way. A theory is not mechanically derived from experiments. It is a creative leap that is later tested. In historical thinking, abduction is even more important because empirical verification is limited. You create conceptual models that make the past understandable, and these models shape how you perceive the possibilities of the present. Temporal distance provides a perspective unavailable from within the process. Contemporaries of events are immersed in their immediacy, entangled in contradictory interpretations, limited by the horizon of their time.
You see the consequences, see which elements turned out to be significant and which did not. This retrospective clarity does not make you omniscient about the present, but shows that the significance of events often reveals itself only later. What seems fundamental now may turn out to be episodic. What seems marginal may become progress. Using this logic, you stop reacting to surface fluctuations and focus on structural shifts. Media noise, political scandals, market movements. These are events that capture attention but rarely change the trajectory. Demographic changes, technological transformations, ecological processes, cultural mutations. These are slow movements that restructure the very possibility of certain events. Distinguishing between noise and signal requires temporal scaling. The palimpsest nature of reality means that any text, any practice, any institution contains traces of previous versions. Reading these traces gives you access to alternative configurations. A modern corporation carries within itself the logic of medieval guilds, the logic of military organization, the logic of bureaucratic rationality. These layers contradict each other, create tensions, but also create possibilities for hybridization. You can consciously activate certain traces and suppress others, creating new organizational forms. The genealogy of power reveals mechanisms of normalization. What seems like a self-evident method of organizing life turns out to be the result of specific historical processes. The school as an institution emerged to produce trained industrial workers. The hospital reorganized the body as an object of medical intervention. Each institution carries the logic of its origin, even when the initial conditions have disappeared. Understanding this genealogy allows reconfiguring institutions for new purposes or creating alternative forms of organization. The counterintuitive aspect is that limited knowledge of the past increases creative freedom.
If you knew everything about the past with absolute precision, it would determine the present completely. Fragmentation, incompleteness, multiplicity of interpretations create space for variation. You are not constrained by a causal chain, but participate in the process of meaning creation through continuous reinterpretation of what was. The micro scale reveals what remains invisible at the macro level. Systems consist of specific interactions between specific people in specific places. By changing these interactions, you change the system even if the overall parameters remain similar. A revolution may fail globally, but create micro-practices that transform everyday life. These micro-practices accumulate, intensify, eventually changing the structure without dramatic events. The legacy of the past in the present means that you always work with material already shaped by previous processes. Language constrains and simultaneously enables thought.
Institutions set boundaries and simultaneously provide resources. Cultural codes orient perception and simultaneously block alternatives. Creative transformation involves working with this material, not discarding it, but recombining, hybridizing, creating new configurations from existing elements. Epistemological multiplicity becomes ontological plasticity. Since the past allows multiple valid interpretations, the present also contains multiple potential trajectories. The choice of interpretation of the past influences which possibilities become visible in the present. History as a discipline becomes a technology of ontology production. Rewriting history literally changes reality because it changes the field of the possible. I work with this plasticity by consciously curating my mental new environment. Which narratives about the past do I animate daily through media, conversations, reading? These narratives form my ontology imperceptibly through repetition and normalization. Mental detoxification identifies toxic configurations of thoughts that reduce the field of the possible. Toxicity here means reduction of complexity, imposition of a single causal line, naturalization of contingent configurations. I replace them with multi-perspectival reconstructions that keep alternative trajectories open. When I understand that the modern organization of labor emerged from specific historical circumstances rather than natural necessity, I can experiment with other forms. When I see that my emotional reactions are stabilized by cultural scripts from the past, I can reprogram them. Historical consciousness becomes a practice of liberation through denaturalization of the present. I create my own ontology through selective activation of elements from different temporal layers, combining them into new configurations that correspond to my goals rather than inherited structures.